About a year and a half ago, I introduced you to Ferrum Audio and to the excellent sounding or headphone amplifier powered by this smart HYPSOS power supply. Ever since that happened, everybody was begging for a Ferrum-made digital download converter, or DAC for short, which would mate perfectly with the OR and further elevate its performance. A few months ago, they revealed that HYPSOS, which was blending together a DAC with a preamp and headphone amp section, but it was not really the unit that everybody was expecting. Still, behind closed doors, Ferrum was already perfecting their flagship DAC, which is the unit that you can see. It's called WANDLA. It's on the costlier side. It goes for 2,800 euros. But besides that off-the-shelf DAC chip, everything else was built from the ground up, trying to maximize its performance as much as possible. But did they succeed at? Well, let's find that out together. Build quality-wise, as you can see, it looks, it feels, it even smells like a Ferrum Audio unit from a mile away, so it looks pretty much the same as the rest of their lineup, except that it has a slightly bigger screen and it's also a touch screen this time around. I still dig that illuminated logo. You can increase or decrease the light output, or you can turn it off completely. As it was the case with the OR and HYPSOS, its top plate was drilled with tiny holes that will move hot air away from its electronics. You can put the HYPSOS below it, and I recommend leaving the OR on top, as is the one that dissipates most of the heat. I used this exact combo in my office and I really didn't have a problem with heat dissipation. Since we're talking about a smart DAC and preamp, except for that touchscreen and big volume knob, everything else was moved on its back. There, from left to right, you'll find a pair of XLR and RCA analog outputs to be used as a DAC only or as a DAC and preamp combo. A pair of RCA analog inputs follow, meaning that WANDLA can be used as a dedicated preamp if you please. 6 digital inputs are next, those will unlock its internal DAC section. And lastly, there's a Ferrum PowerLink 4-pole DC input that connects it directly to HYPSOS, and an additional DC input that lets you connect its default switching mode power supply. Checking out its inner workings, about a quarter of its internal space is being occupied by the power supply, regulation and filtering stages. But wait a minute, didn't I just mention that it can be powered by the HYPSOS power supply or by that switching mode power supply? Yes, I did, but that is only the first AC to DC power stage. Everything else that has to do with smaller DC voltages can be found inside the unit, which I must say looks quite impressive. Going further, you can see a small daughter board hovering atop the main board, which is called Serce, which is probably the most important part of the unit. Serce offers a set of audio-optimized digital inputs that work together with a custom programmed ARM processor. It performs the tasks of 5 individual chips, shortening the signal path considerably. 2 femtosecond clocks can be found on the same board, a bar brown SPDIF chip, and the big one is the ARM CPU, which I previously mentioned. WANDLA offers 3 ESS digital filters, and a world first 2 digital filters were made for Ferrum by the makers of HQ Player, and I must say that those two have a tremendous impact on the sound quality. Just below the volume knob you can see a 100 MHz clock, the notorious ES9038 Pro DAC chip, and immediately after that a custom-made IV conversion stage. If you want to learn more about this custom current to voltage conversion stage, then I wholeheartedly recommend checking out my written review, which I left below. Finally, a hybrid analog buffer stage follows. which uses separate ICs for all 4 channels, including discrete components and 4 AXICOM analog relays for a perfect channel balance. Long story short, this is far from your ordinary ESS Sabre converter, starting with the power supply, IV stage, buffer stage, preamp stage. Everything was built from the ground up, and I already see our money worth with this unit. Alright guys, this is pretty much it, so let's hit some eardrums. People are sometimes making preconceptions about the sound of a set DAC only by looking at the internal layout and components being used. Others are looking at some measurements, and there's a third group which always trusts their hearing abilities. But I do believe the truth is always somewhere in the middle. When you use off-the-shelf components and you copy-paste those reference boards, then you'll be getting the same performance and the same sound all over again, and I have plenty of examples to prove it. All those super affordable units usually coming from Asia, they sound more or less the same to me. But looking back at all those units that truly impressed me, always had some kind of custom work behind them, be them custom FPGAs, custom IV stages, buffer stages, as frankly, polishing a stone into a gemstone requires quite some time. Now, audio engineers that think outside the box will be providing you a very different sound, a very different experience, and that's why a few converters might be a little bit unusual to you at first, but oftentimes for a better sound, new paths need to be paved, as following the usual approach will only lead to the same results as before. 10 years ago, I didn't believe in high-end hi-fi, but after trying a dozen of FPGA DACs, R2R DACs, I realized that I was living in a big, ignorant bubble. Nowadays, I'm open-minded and I really treasure new developments in the digital and analog domains, and I truly believe that Ferrum Audio is one of those innovators. WANDLA is not your regular ESS Sabre DAC, and I'm sure that some of you see it this way, but after trying more than 40 ESS Sabre equipped units, this one is not sounding like any of those units. The very first impression that I've got with WANDLA is that everything just pours naturally, everything is coming in a very effortless, easy way manner. This one is not aggressive, there is no brightness, there is no listening fatigue. It also sounds very refined in a way. I have a Rockner Wave Dream signature awaiting in my office, and while that sounds very refined, very technical at the same time, that is unsurprising knowing its price point. What is surprising is that this one has a very similar skill set at just a fraction of Rockner's price. I'm sure many of you are wondering if HYPSOS is a must-have upgrade for the WANDLA. And unsurprisingly, HYPSOS does to WANDLA exactly what it did to War and Erzo before it. And by that I mean infusing a little bit more life into my music, making everything a little bit more jumpier, slightly more engaging sounding. I'll give you that the difference was not really night and day, it was not really massive, but I cannot deny that dynamics improved. And I also got this weird feeling like I was getting slightly more power from the War as the sound got a little bit more powerful. So dynamics improved, of course, the bass was thicker sounding. I feel that crescendo moments were bringing forward a little bit more emotions. What was also a little bit unusual is that WANDLA never felt fuzzy or out of focus sounding on its own, but with HYPSOS I felt that I had better stereo image and I could focus much easier on the notes playing in the background. Transparency improved as well, but what was already a fun sound signature on this one on its own transformed into a dopamine dosing machine with the HYPSOS, just sounding a little bit livelier than ever before. If you already own the OR and you're thinking of getting the WANDLA, then I do believe HYPSOS is a no-brainer upgrade, it's a must-have upgrade. But if you are thinking of getting just the WANDLA, then HYPSOS becomes a possible upgrade down the road. Still, if your pockets are deep enough, you can get them both for maximum performance. Moving on to dynamics and transit response, WANDLA has one ace under its sleeve, and that is the voltage output at full power, which sits at 9.3 volts versus the industry standard 4 volt output. meaning that it will be empowering the power stage of your amplifier that follows, meaning that you'll be getting more power from the OR or from any other amplifier that is connecting to the Wandla. So think about it like overclocking your CPU, or maybe like providing more voltage to an electrical motor. It's exactly like that, and you'll feel that immediately, that you are getting more power and more dynamics. I went ahead and connected a few desktop headphone amplifiers to this one. Some were affordable, some were expensive, but I felt that every single amplifier benefited from a higher voltage intake. A70 Pro by Topping is already a decent amplifier for Susvara owners on its own, but after replacing that D70 Pro with Wandla, I immediately felt that I've got more power. I felt that the sound was weightier, more powerful, there was more kick in the bass, and I can say that this one is just a dynamics monster unit, because every amplifier that was connected to Wandla was simply mean sounding, very ballsy and punchy sounding at the same time. It's redundant talking about speed in an ESS Saber DAC. I do believe that all of them are sounding fast, and this is really no different. But the real showstopper was that raw bass slam that hits you like a train. Some of my headphones, they need a helping hand in sounding more punchy, more alive, because some of them are ultra linear, and a sane person will use some sort of EQ to boost that bass. I don't EQ that much, meaning that I'll need to swap that amplifier with a meaner, punchier sounding amplifier, but I feel that I don't need to do that with the Wandla, because it already boosts that bass energy quite a lot. And if you like bass and everything that has to do with it, if you like dynamics, bass slam, that you cannot go wrong with this unit. I had another strong impression when I've heard this one for the first time, and that was note separation and depth. Now, usually with Delta Sigma designs like this one, they will impress you right away with a big stage from left to right. But what really differentiates a great sounding DAC from an outstanding sounding DAC is not really the soundstage, but the note separation on the Z-axis, or the so-called depth and layering. Now, I got my Rockna Wave Dream signature mostly because it has that outstanding layering and note separation, pretty much the best that I've ever heard. It just changed my headphone listening in a very big way. Everything sounds super, super deep. It's like I've changed those stereo recordings with binaural recordings. It's like I'm listening to a near-field setup every single time. There is no listening fatigue. It's like everything just hovers all around me. It's very, very great in that regard. Now, when it comes to Delta Sigma designs, I do believe that about 2 to 3 units impressed me thus far. Gustard A26 was pretty impressive on the depth, followed by Metix Audio Element X, also pretty good. But what Ferrum Audio did with their Wandla is really nothing short of spectacular. So today is not about the soundstage, which is great. Today is all about that depth, note separation, which I believe Wandla does so well. Moving on to detail retrieval, most ESS DACs already mastered the art of extracting as much information as possible from our tunes. And I've tried all kinds of ESS DACs before, but unresolving ones, those didn't came up yet. Now, we can all agree that once you hear a very resolving sounding DAC, very transparent sounding DAC to its core, it's really difficult or close to impossible going back to a less resolving one. And the mere fact that I'm thinking replacing that core Dave with Ferrum WANDLA already hints you about its resolving abilities. What's more interesting is the way it provides that information, which is really kind of unusual, especially for an ESS DAC. What impressed me, however, was not its sheer resolving abilities and its transparency, but the way that information is provided to me. There's one thing listening to a highly resolving but ultimately thin, unevolving and boring sounding unit, and there's something else completely listening to a highly resolving but ultimately very engaging and fun sounding unit. If you ever tried an FPGA DAC before, from the likes of Chord Electronics, AudioByte, DCS, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. You aren't getting such units for their resolving abilities, but mostly for their naturalness, for their liquidity, for their easygoing manner, and that's exactly what I'm getting from the WANDLA. I don't believe I ever called an ESS Saber DAC as smooth or liquid sounding, but WANDLA browses through my music collection with such an ease that I don't believe system matching is important with such a unit. If you are wondering how this one sounded in a stereo setup as a DAC and preamp combo, in very few words, it sounded just fantastic. So, compared to many other units that passed through my hands, this one sounded better as a DAC and preamp combo compared to Gustard R26, A26, compared to any SMSL or tapping unit, even compared to a pricier Matrix Audio Element X. Its preamp section was actually a big surprise because at this price I personally didn't experience such a good DAC and preamplifier, and Ferrum felt so confident in its preamplifier section that they even added a set of RCA analog inputs. So if you need, you can use this one just as a preamplifier. As for the sound in my stereo setup, it was always punchy, bold, full-bodied, very tight. It had an amazing note separation and the soundstage was big. So again, no complaints in a stereo setup. Moving on to frequency response, the bass is powerful in this one, and not only in terms of bass texture, but especially in terms of bass weight and kick. However, I had a big surprise when I moved from that USB connection to I2S connection. So if you have a DDC, maybe a music server, maybe a wireless streamer that has an I2S connection, then you are in for a big surprise, because from an already great sounding bass, I've got more layers of it, I've got a punchier type of bass, and just a cleaner bass in general. But still, regardless of what digital input you'll be using, I do believe that its bass is always juicy, full-bodied, and punchy. People are usually mentioning a dry, thin, or just boring sounding mid-range on units that have ESS Saber silicone. You'll find everywhere this information online, from forums to big media outlets. Everybody thinks that if you like a full-bodied mid-range, then you should steer away from such silicone. The thing is, this one has indeed an ESS Saber DAC inside, but everything else was built from the ground up, and the end result is pretty much the most organic and natural sounding ESS Saber DAC that I have experienced thus far. So its mid-range is, again, smooth and organic sounding. It's very effortless, very easygoing. It doesn't have any kind of digitus. It's full-bodied at the same time, and I believe it will change your preconceptions regarding DAC chips in general, because it sounds true to life. When taking away all that digitus, glare, listening fatigue, brightness, everything that remains is a natural representation of the frequency response. So please don't think about such things, because WANDLA doesn't have any of that. Instead, you'll be thinking about how real and how beautiful your music is sounding. Its treble is extended and clean sounding, but it's never overly sharp. It's never doesn't have those super strong leading edges, so you can even put some bright sounding headphones, some bright sounding speakers, and that wouldn't be a problem. You can listen to music for hours and hours, and you'll never have some listening fatigue. It transitions so well between treble, mid-range, and bass, and does it so easily and so effortless that sometimes I'm thinking that maybe a vacuum tube was hidden somewhere inside under its PCB, or maybe below that display assembly. It always compels you to add more music to your playlist. Wrapping things up, I have a question for you guys. Yes, for you. How do you measure if a DA converter is worth its asking price? Are you opening them up, and are you doing a bill of materials? Are you taking into consideration all that research and development time, or are you just listening to it and you are drawing your own conclusions? I'm very curious about the answers, but I'm doing all of that and maybe a little bit more. Ferrum WANDLA wasn't really made in a month, and it won't be replaced the next year, so it's not that typical live fast, die young type of DAC that is coming from Asia that will be replaced the next month. This one is not really like that. WANDLA is about the fun times, WANDLA is about human emotions, WANDLA is about the music, and that's why I do believe it easily won my highest Gold Award. And I do believe that its asking price of 2,800 euros was not a fair price, but a bargain price considering how it performed in both stereo and headphone setup. Alright guys, for a much longer in-depth review, please check out my written review that I left below. It's a much longer one. It contains a lot more information. Thank you guys for watching, for supporting this channel. My name is Sando, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!